How's it going? Today it's on. Today is Friday. It's time for the talk, the conversation with Jeers and nothing else. A quick summary of something that's happening right now because Jeers sent me a post. Did you see this already? I'm looking at it. And well, obviously, I was surprised because Donald Trump has sent, according to what the New York Times says, has he sent it or is he going to send it? Actually, he intends to send the United States Army against foreign cartels. President Trump has already signed a decree, a directive for the Pentagon to use military forces against Latin American cartels designated as terrorists. The measure aims to halt the flow of fentanyl and other drugs. Although they don't mention Mexico, obviously that's what they've always referred to, especially since they've already put on the list the cartels they say are terrorists. So all of this, they are from strong anonymous sources who confirmed that United States officials are already preparing operational plans by sea and land, especially sea and land, against these groups. The move, he says here, raises serious legal questions about how they are going to enter another country. For example, if they eliminate Mexicans, for example, or Colombians, I mean, if they eliminate civilians, how is that legal? I mean, how does that work? The Department of Defense, for now, they've asked him, I mean, they've asked the guy from the Pentagon, and the Pentagon says, well, that they can't talk about any topic about that. So how are you, Jerez? Good morning, very well.
First of all, good morning, greetings to the whole community. Well, we woke up to this news. I mean, you can never plan the videos here because every day 10 new topics come up. This topic, although it's not new, and I think to a certain extent, the idea had already been circulating since the beginning of the year with the arrival of Donald Trump. In this second period, which is becoming official, labeling drug trafficking groups as terrorist groups, now narco-terrorism.
That part isn't new. The new thing would be the official signing. That would be the mistake.
Totally. We have to remember that it had already been reported, especially during Biden's term, that Donald Trump's administration. In the first one, he had the intention and had requested plans several times. Or how could they intervene militarily against the cartels? And that the group he had at that time was stopping him one way or another, or said there were no possibilities, that this really was outside the regulatory framework that would allow them to act that way. Now then, in this new administration of Donald Trump, we have to remember, how does he sideline all these people who in one way or another dared to say no to him and to put the brakes on him, as any person with common sense would have to do? And now Donald Trump is basically doing whatever he has always wanted to do. It's a situation that is very complex. Indeed, as you point out, it's going to be very complicated. A legal basis, a legal foundation regarding how these interventions are going to take place. Yes, and it's not only going to affect Mexico, it's not only going to affect Venezuela, because the presence of these groups is basically all over the world.
Of course.
They're going to concentrate in these countries, but for example, maybe in Argentina, or maybe in El Salvador, or maybe in Ecuador. They won't have any problems acting in the sense that there will surely be bilateral cooperation to confront the drug trafficking groups. The problem will arise in countries where there are ideological positions against it, and we've been seeing this, especially in very specific cases, such as Venezuela, Colombia, Mexico, and Brazil, where there have already been some differences. How has the issue of judicial proceedings against presidents been? And these are countries that are not aligned with or do not follow the same logic as the United States. I'm not judging it as good or bad. I'm just describing it. What could that scenario be? Something I find impossible not to relate. Are these judicial processes against different drug lords, processes where agreements are being reached? We were talking about it a few moments ago off the air. The case of Caro Quintero. Caro Quintero is the most important drug lord for the United States. Not because he has the largest operation currently or in recent times, but because of the case of the Drug Enforcement Administration agent who was killed Kiki Camarena, which at the time was a scandal because it has always been a sore spot. The United States, for not having been able to take action against this drug trafficker and everyone else involved. This week it was announced that both Mayo Zambada and Caro Quintero El Viceroy escaped the death penalty, and that the United States has decided not to seek the death penalty, which leads us to understand, or we can infer, that there is or will be an agreement with these individuals. And that's exactly where there could be, or where the United States could look for this justification or this reasoning for why to intervene in these countries. We have to consider it because it's obvious that for the drug cartels to operate the way they do, there has to be complicity from the authorities. I mean, it's impossible for global operations to be run acting like multinationals without authorities both in Latin America and also in the United States being involved. It's going to be very interesting to see how all of this unfolds, especially since it's happening at such a complex time. I think that Latin America was usually the calmest part of the world when it came to these geopolitical movements, I insist. It's very complicated to define it as something positive or something negative because we don't know what implications there might be, and above all, we don't know what kind of actions will be taken. If they told me that these were going to be precision shots, so to speak, that only the people affected would be the guilty ones, the criminals, well, what better news could there be for Latin America? But that seems difficult. And really, well, hopefully it will be done in the best way possible. If it's already a fact that it's going to happen, which I insist, everything seems to indicate that it is. Now, this doesn't mean that it's going to start happening tomorrow. I mean, not necessarily. This could take some time. It could maybe be in 2 years, or actually it could be tomorrow. And something that I even thought we were going to start with, which is definitely along the same lines, is the topic of Maduro. Yesterday, this reward is increased. It is doubled for Nicolas Maduro, for Padrino Lopez, for Diosdado Cabello, and for all these central figures of the Venezuelan government or dictatorship. And the accusation against them is precisely drug trafficking, and the accusation against them is their connection with the Sinaloa cartel. It's that they are part of the cartel of Los Soles, and I think we can't look at these news stories separately.
Is it a good thing they asked the president about it? And she says no. Well, it's because they have to be based on the laws of Mexico. When you extradite someone and the death penalty doesn't exist here, that's why they decide not to proceed that way. Well, that's the comment they make because let's say under that rule it couldn't be done, right? That's part of the answer that was given, I imagine, also to calm the internal nervousness a bit, but there is definitely nervousness. Now just imagine, what could someone like Caro Quintero say? After years of operating, basically diminished, he's no longer a leader. What information could he have from the past? Also, that could be related to a current interest. And another topic you mentioned is that maybe this whole approach isn't towards Mexico, but maybe it's towards Venezuela. That it's an attempt to go and, well, try to overthrow Maduro. I'm not sure if it's that extreme, but okay. Let's say that's another option. Because it's also been mentioned that the Cartel of the Suns is also considered a terrorist group.
I would say that a first step will be Venezuela. Maduro's position is unsustainable. The electoral fraud from a year ago was completely blatant. In fact, some or even many voices from the left itself pointed it out that way, which should be acknowledged, as they didn't let ideology win over them and they called things as they are. And the Organization of American States just a couple of days ago, if I remember correctly, spoke out again on the issue of Venezuela and the United States. It seems that they have acted very prudently Given how tensions have increased, how has the repression been in Venezuela, especially in the days following the election? Well, many of us started to think that now they really are going to come in, or they're going to overthrow Nicolas Maduro. And yet it doesn't really seem like a tense calm, does it? But in these last few weeks, there has been an increase in tensions, especially inside Venezuela. And what about the reports that have been coming out from different groups, including the government itself? A few days ago, Diosdado Cabello came out saying that they had arrested some American terrorists who were going to plant a bomb, and I don't know what else. Yesterday, it was reported that this intelligence area was involved. Then the name Senfai came up. I can't remember the name right now, but
Yes, yes, yeah. Basically, they're Gestapo. That's right.
that was around the United States Embassy. They were taking people's cell phones, citizens' cell phones, to check what kind of information they had. Something they've already been doing since the last election, or the supposed election, Servicio Bolivariano de Inteligencia Nacional, exactly. In that sense, this tension that's being shown by the Venezuelan regime, I don't think it's for nothing. I don't think they really understand where Donald Trump's government is heading. At the beginning of Trump's administration, we mentioned it, the issue of the importance of someone like Marco Rubio in the position that Marco Rubio holds. He does have a personal, particular, and political interest also about the destruction and preventing these regimes from continuing to control countries. And specifically, I mean, the top priority for him is Cuba, without a doubt. But just like Cuba, there's Daniel Ortega in Nicaragua and Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela, and to a lesser extent. But you should also keep them on your radar because of their proximity, like Colombia, Brazil, Mexico, and even Bolivia itself. So is he coming? I think some very tense weeks are coming. There are a lot of things happening that seem to indicate a certain calm, but at the same time, it seems like this calm is the prelude to something else.
It felt like something big is about to happen, right? I feel curious, but it hasn't happened yet, right? So all of these are just signs. Now, I mean, what we were talking about yesterday regarding the Maduro case and this whole doubling of the reward. Well, it seemed like on one hand you say, well, if they're increasing the rewards, it's because they're not going to do anything. Because if they're putting up the reward, it means that, I mean, they don't plan to operate themselves. They need someone else to operate, right? To say that. We shouldn't forget Einstein's case. Everything generated shows and everything that creates a spectacle, well, they're going to keep doing it, right? With those smoke screens, then, no, on one hand, there's that, and the more pressure builds up around the case of Einstein, the more they're going to increase the pressure on controversial cases, like, well, going to invade another
Country, right? No. And if tomorrow, I'm not saying it will happen tomorrow, but if tomorrow the United States sends a drone and carries out an attack anywhere in Latin America with the justification that it's for any kind of reason, I'm not even talking about Maduro. Einstein, sorry, that wouldn't be the headline, not at all. The headline would be that, and it would be worldwide, and all the attention would be focused over there. I have to go back a bit to what's relevant to Mexico, because there's something that seems like we've forgotten. What was the first action the United States took on this issue? I don't know if you remember at the beginning of this new administration of Donald Trump, they sent these aircraft carriers right next to Baja California. They were right in front of the coast where I live, here in Ensenada.
well, yes,
A plane to travel.
some ships. They weren't aircraft carriers, but they were big ships.
But they brought this plane or drone, yes, a spy, right? The spy drone, is it the same one used in the Middle East? Yes. Now then, that drone must have collected something, or quite a bit to be more precise. Remember, it occurred not only in Baja California, but also along the coasts. Along the Sea of Cortez, which covers the area of Sinaloa, Sonora, and the Baja California Peninsula. Now, that's what we know. There were also the routes that he made throughout the country and along the United States border, all along the borderline. Where are the states with the greatest presence of drug trafficking groups? I started to notice this, and I really do question it almost every day. And it's not just my own speculation, but I do start to see a pattern, and I start to see lines that are coming together. I don't think we can look at this separately. I think this has really been a series of steps that are clearly defined. I don't think that right now either the Pentagon or the Department of Defense are making the plans. I think they've had the plans made for quite a while. And I think the plans included, as a first step, to label them as terrorist groups. The presence of these spy drones or these ships, the trials they have been conducting, the negotiations with the different drug lords, the pressure they have been putting on various countries. I mean, the pressure that has been put on Mexico beyond the tariff issue, but with the issue of possible or probable links to drug trafficking, has been more than clear. The pressure they have put on Petro, whether we like it or not, is there, and it's obvious. Venezuela's situation seems clear to us, but that's not the case with Brazil. And this interference that the United States has been having with the process involving Jair Bolsonaro?
It has been a campaign that, although it's been going on for a while, you're right, it's been going on for a while, and maybe this planning has even been in place. But lately, it seems like there's a clear campaign. And that's why at the very beginning, when it started, we talked about the situation, about what you just mentioned about Marco Rubio. The Secretary of State is the most important position after the president. Because the vice president doesn't really do much more than pay attention to what's going on. In case he has to become president, well, to see what to do. Aside from that, he doesn't operate on a large scale. The Secretary of State is the one who operates. And the fact that he put an expert on Latin American issues, someone who has experienced first-hand situations like, for example, the dictatorship in Cuba. I mean, because of his family, right? His family had to live through that situation. Well, he knows, he understands, and he has information and a real interest in the subject. So it was strange that after he was the Russia-Ukraine war, all the multiple wars in the Middle East, and a bunch of other things, that they don't put someone with that profile, but instead they put a Latino profile and an anti-autocrat, anti-dictator profile, right? So, but at the end of the day, months have gone by and nothing has happened up until now. Watch out, watch out. Is there something that
I need to put on the table? Yes, because it's just that we've gone so fast in a whirlwind of information this year. Yes, we forget something? It's only been 8 months of Trump's administration, exactly.
is not?
It's not that nothing has been done. He's just getting here, just getting here. He hasn't even completed a quarter of his term yet, and I think too many things have happened sometimes. Sometimes as simple mortals. Maybe we would like all of this to move faster, to be clearer about where it's going. I think, on the contrary, it's actually moving quite fast. I mean, in just 8 months, we went from having a spy drone in Mexican territory, from naming the cartels as terrorists to about 30 drug lords turning themselves in. I mean, not the lower ranks, but really the main drug traffickers. That agreement started to be finalized. And now this series of possible interventions that could... And I put the emphasis on the word possible because, first of all, even though everything seems to indicate yes, and even though surely this is a leak that the Donald Trump government itself causes. I mean, this is a message that the Donald Trump government wants to send. And I state this, or I dare to state it, because it's such a sensitive issue. It's hard to believe a government employee would say, I'm going to share this with a journalist. No, I mean, it's not gossip, it's not... And look, so-and-so has a lover, and they say that Sultano fought with Perengano in a Pentagon meeting. Aren't you talking about a radical change in Latin American politics like maybe we haven't seen in the last 30 or 40 years? We're talking about a possible United States military intervention in countries in Latin America. And this, we've talked about this many times, and I think in the last show we really emphasized it. In an increasingly polarized Latin America, and a Latin America where you have a sector with an anti-Yankee, anti-imperialist discourse that's willing to justify any atrocity by Nicolas Maduro, of Ortega, of Diaz-Canel, because of this supposed sovereignty and this anti-imperialist, anti-Yankee issue, etc. And you have another sector of the population that's completely the opposite and is eager for the United States to get involved, come in, and expel these regimes. To the point of justifying regimes or actions like those of Bukele, like those of Novoa, like those of Mili. It's a very, very complex situation where Latin America could become a powder keg.
Exactly. And what Trump might not understand is that an intervention of this kind would also be justified. Well, certain group would say, we're telling you they want to intervene, they want to do this, they want to do that. And then you polarize even more, you divide even more. And that, well, also comes with many internal risks in the countries. That's why it will have to be handled very intelligently, especially by the democracies of Latin America, which could be affected, right? I mean, to try to find the middle ground and say, well, I can cooperate up to this point, but these are my red lines. And these can't be crossed because then there would have to be consequences. Otherwise, they're just going to do whatever they want. It happens.
What worries me, just to be clear, is that it's a very complex issue. On one hand, I have I'm sure that without the current pressure from Donald Trump, nothing would be getting done in Mexico at all.
This past year, exactly.
And it's even appreciated. It's a good thing there's pressure from the United States, because now people are starting to pay attention to the issue of organized crime. On one hand, let them take all the drug traffickers, and honestly, if there are military operations, I'm more than happy. There's no problem at all. However, I don't think it would stop there. I also don't think there would only be precision strikes. Not really. There could be an impact on the public. There could be an impact on innocent people, on civilians. This is concerning, as it will likely prompt a reaction from the other side. I can't imagine these drug trafficking groups, which are really as heavily armed as any terrorist group in the Middle East, just sitting idly by. The other question is, what will the international response be? It's a scenario with many levels and many layers. Now, watch out, and here I'm doing the right thing. I understand that what you're going to say next is speculation and not necessarily factual. I'm going to play the speculator. I'm going to put on a little tinfoil hat. Let's see what the whole scenario is. Next week, or in the coming week, there will be a meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin had a call with Xi Jinping today. Where is Russian spoken? Published?
Yes.
That the call was about the conversation they're going to have with the United States, and about the idea of being able to build an agreement for Ukraine and the permanent high-level status for Dad. It should be remembered that before starting the invasion of Ukraine, Vladimir Putin met with Xi Jinping when the Winter Olympics took place. Yes, and it was only after those games ended that the invasion of Ukraine began. But another point we're forgetting is the call that Netanyahu had with Vladimir Putin in recent days, which was the
second, 2 calls?
Yes, which was the second one in a period of a week and a half.
Yes, a few days, 2 or 3 days, yes.
We must also recall that currently it appeared to be awful management to me. Indeed, it was a primary subject I discussed. How are the United States' tariff policies against India pushing India toward the Russian bloc or the Chinese bloc? So much so that the cancellation of the aircraft purchase that India had planned with the United States was announced. Modi has said, unlike other regimes or other presidents, I think he understands very well the importance that India has right now. What is the growth or the potential short term growth that India is going to have? And in that sense, Modi has not bowed down to Donald Trump, on the contrary. I think he's raising the stakes with this approach to Russia, and we have to remember that India is part of the Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. So all this management starts to take place. At some point, there was speculation when Donald Trump showed signs of such closeness with Putin and so much distance from Zelensky. This speculation borders on conspiracy theory. While there's no certainty, it was considered as a possibility that Israel would control the Middle East, that Russia would control this part that belongs to China, the Asian part, and that the United States would keep Latin America and Europe. Given the logic of what's published today in the New York Times, I have no doubt that speculation will come up again, which I insist is not necessarily the case. It's not that there are elements to say it's clear or there's evidence telling us that, but it's a possibility. Countries, regimes, whether they're left wing, right wing, wherever they are, what they have are interests. And now, whether we like it or not, whether we agree or not, geopolitical changes are happening that will mark a new era or a new stage in history. Whatever happens, whether it's like that, the tensions end, and tomorrow everyone signs a beautiful peace agreement. The world has drastically changed over the past 3 years, resulting in the formation of distinct blocs. So we're entering an extremely newsworthy, extremely interesting time, but at the same time, it's also a period that could be dangerous. I insist, I want to stress the word could. This doesn't mean that something is necessarily going to happen, but it does mean that tensions are building or pressures are increasing. Specific contractors for certain measures that countries are going to take is going to be very, very important. What happens and what comes out, what is known from this meeting between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump.
The issue here between the tariff war, which has caused an isolation of the United States, even though they say it hasn't, but it is causing it. I mean, Mexico and Canada are now already looking to improve their trade relationship. Even the Canadian Prime Minister will visit Mexico. Well, up to now, I mean, it is President Claudia Sheinbaum has not yet had an official visit with the United States. It's been more than 6 months. It's a topic that draws attention, but she's going to have a meeting with a head of state, with the Canadian Prime Minister. So, well, the United States also has one, and I think that's what they're scolding Trump for. Bob, he has to measure his moves in Latin America based on the fact that, well, those same countries, if they're not with the United States, then they'll have to be with someone else, right? I mean, what it is that there are also other blocks, even if they're not the same, even if they're not the same size, they're getting bigger and bigger, and everyone is sure that the next world powers, besides the obvious one, which is China, are India and Indonesia. In fact, many believe that Indonesia will be much higher than India. I mean, that's how strong they see Indonesia in the near future. But then there's Vietnam and the Philippines, and they're countries that are also doing interesting things in Asia. Mexico has strong relationships with Japan and Korea, as evidenced by their significant presence here, of Koreans living and building industry here in Nuevo Leon. But it's also because we're close to Mexico, to the United States. So, well, I think both sides will have to be understanding each other so this doesn't become a powder keg. As you say, and obviously I find what you're saying interesting. I don't see it as that far off. That, well, what's happening right now could also be taken advantage of by Russia, by China, right? I mean, there are a lot of blocks, well, not a lot, but there are several blocks that are already involved globally, including in the United States. Look, yesterday a relative was talking to me about the United States and said, hey, why is Russia spending $1 trillion on the war with Ukraine? I asked him, where did you get that number from? He says, guess it. Well, that's what certain media outlets are saying. And I told him, look, I'm going to tell you what the Washington Post says, which is a pretty well known and serious outlet when it comes to all those topics. And their number is 300 billion, which is what they've spent on the entire war. And then he told me, so what interest could that outlet have in saying that? And me, exactly, that's where it is.
Prepare yourself for
That opinion, exactly what it's telling you is, well, is giving you information that wants to show Russia as stronger internally in the United States, or even watch out.
I would change it for you.
To a state of alert of.
Russia is in a state of alert.
It can also be.
Watch out. Me personally, yes, it's not exactly an opinion applauded or recognized. I do believe that Vladimir Putin's regime must end. I do believe that Europe, especially because of its proximity and because it's almost right at its doorstep, the war must have a much greater presence and involvement. I understand the caution because of what could be triggered otherwise. However, of the population does not want there to be an intervention in Russia. And I understand that because of the escalation it could cause. However, the longer you wait, you're going to get involved anyway, and I do see it as inevitable. For now, and based on what we know today, I don't see any conditions for the war in Ukraine to end today, just as I don't see them in Israel, Palestine, in Israel, Iran. No. Another point I would like to highlight is the increase in tensions that has occurred between France, England, and Israel. Yes, because it seems like it's a minor issue, but it's not. Both the fact that these countries recognize or intend to or announce that they are going to recognize Palestine as a state, and Israel's stance of ramping up its rhetoric against these powers. In other words, it tells us about a complex no. And because it's happening more and more, what I see in the current situation is that we have less and less room for error. We have to remember, I think it was this week, if not last week, this deployment that the United States has carried out. Their submarines, between military exercises, the planes that they're flying close everywhere, but also Russia, the propaganda they're spreading about their military potential. Well, it tells you about an environment that gives us less and less margin for error. And sadly, we have politicians who are very prone to improvisation and who can make a mistake, but, well, there's no doubt about it.
Exactly. No. As you say, the margin of error is getting bigger and bigger. How can I say it like more sensitive? I mean, with a higher chance that something could happen. That's all. In the last 2 days, American planes have been seen right on the borderline with Chinese territory and with the territory Russian. So you see that there's this constant pressure where if something goes wrong, then people start talking about it. It could even lead to a war. And well, a single mistake.
Even from an individual, not even a politician. Someone who loses control. Someone who says, hey, yes, he crossed my line. Hey, I have to take him down. Those were the instructions I was given. In fact, even an accident can get you into a pretty complicated situation. I want to believe, we don't know, but I want to believe that the lines of communication between the powers are still handled by people of a high level of seriousness and intelligence. And I'm not referring to the political side, but rather to the military side of this communication that exists between nuclear powers, especially to prevent that kind of thing. But this one, I want to believe, I'm saying this without any evidence, because if we've seen anything, it's that these people are becoming more and more distant. Those who dare to dissent are only surrounding themselves with a group that belongs to them, or where they know they won't face any resistance to their wishes and whims. We are living in a complex era, extremely interesting for political analysis. And I think that while it's always good to stay informed, especially for those of us who love news topics, these topics must be addressed. Because I still see that most people in society are unaware of and disconnected from everything that's happening. And likewise, going back a bit to the Latin American topic,
and a lack of sensitivity to be able to identify what is news and what is fake news. I mean, everything is already so. I mean, numbers don't mean anything anymore. When I was telling you about the trillion, I mean, you say it's just, I mean, we're talking about a number that's extremely far off. But what I'm getting at is that people just don't anymore. A lot of people, at least, like, can't tell anymore if the number is correct. If this news, I mean, they're just going along with it. And besides, the leaders don't help either because the leaders also have their own interests. They're the
main ones promoting this whole environment of biased information overload. The issue extends beyond the prevalence of false information. There is also a significant informational bias originating from the government itself.
just with that alone. And every government has its own. So it's tough, isn't it?
One of, well, as a side note, one of the most well-known literary dystopias is the one from Brave New World by Huxley.
Basically talked about
that. I mean, the best way to control society is not to restrict information, it's to saturate it with information. It's reaching the point where you can't tell what's true and what's a lie anymore. And right now we're in that era. Right now we're at a moment where you open any social network and you'll find endless amounts of false information. And indeed, where it is and will be increasingly difficult to distinguish what's real from what's fake, what's real from what seeks to manipulate. With the topic of artificial intelligence, it's very simple, and it's going to get easier and easier. The ability to generate videos, the ability to generate images that want to say something when they don't have any truthful basis. And I think that's where we have a responsibility as citizens to inform ourselves and to get information not just from one line of thought, right? And one recommendation I give to everyone is if you've already identified your biases, and I'm going to talk about Mexico because it's easier since we can apply it to the world as a whole. So if you read La Jornada, read Reforma 2, find both biases and make a thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. In a global case, if you're reading Russia Today, which you know is a propaganda outlet, then read the British Broadcasting Corporation too to see what they say, and read Cable News Network and the New York Times. And you take the same news from all four and start forming your own judgment, understanding that each one has a bias or an editorial line, and also learning to differentiate between opinions and news. Be careful. And I say this very specifically. I give my opinion. I usually try to base it on facts and news. That's why I sometimes cite my sources or where I get the information. But it's a personal opinion. It's not a fact. It's not the truth. And this happens a lot with some channels, especially as we discussed a while ago. They present opinions as facts, as news, and give them to you as absolute truth. And they don't even go through the minimum process of investigation, and you realize that it has no basis at all, that it's really propaganda and not news, facts, or anything else.
Exactly. Hey, Giles. Well, moving on to other topics because there are other topics, right? Because there are several topics pending that I think we could talk about. We never cover all the topics, but we managed to get through some of them. A quick review where they paid attention to me, and that's something we hardly ever talk about. But the Bank of Mexico lowered the interest rate. It's already the 5th cut this year at NT. I'm not sure if he has already left or is planning to, but essentially, I believe
it's just the announcement.
He's already leaving. He made the announcement, didn't he? 10 years, right? He spent a decade trying to establish himself in Mexico without success. Clearly, I understand that he's going to sell his share, which is like $2 billion. And then another company will come along to try to get into a market that's basically controlled by Telcel, right? This one? The company of, what's it called? Of Carlos Slim, of Carlos Lee. I mean, the one that's a monopoly exactly, right? That also tells you a lot, doesn't it? And well, the key meeting we just mentioned, which will be key for Kema, the Mexican president, with the Canadian prime minister. How do you see that part of the economy that we hardly touch on, but that I find very interesting? To understand what's happening right now in this country and in the context of tariffs used basically
as extortion.
extortion, exactly.
It's extortion that Mexico is facing. Well, not just Mexico, because really it's the whole world, almost the whole world, right? If you don't do what Donald Trump wants, then here come the tariffs. Mexico is going through a very complicated economic situation. The debt has already reached 19 trillion. The debt has grown quite a lot. And we have the bottomless barrel, which is Pemex, where money keeps being injected by the Ministry of Finance. Last week, if I remember correctly, a new loan was authorized for Pemex, where resources from the Ministry of Finance are used as a guarantee. I think it was $20 billion, and it doesn't look like this is going to stop. Now, are there good things or things that seem to be good? Because we still don't have a clear understanding of them, of this conflict that's happening. The day before yesterday, the director of Pemex hinted that Mexico is not going to use the old fracking, but will use fracking with new technology or something like that. He already hinted that there will be foreign private investment. This will be a week after the agreement was announced that Mexico will remove tariff and non-tariff barriers for non-tariff communities.
Well, that's a good point. You know, interestingly, the way Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador handled this, very nationalist and all that stuff, they could be very powerful cards to negotiate with the United States, right? They would also be convenient for Mexico for business. You know what? Well, look, all those things are restricted from you all these years. Now I'm opening up, right? And I mean, it would be good news for Mexico. For Mexico, it would be spectacular. It would be great. For the
president, I don't think she will be in political terms.
No, because of its base. But that base right now is crushed, don't you think? I mean, because there's a lot of pressure here for everyone, let's say from the no group. When I say base, I'm referring to the voters.
I'm not referring to the politician.
And yes, it does depend on how they sell it, right? Because, you know, they always have their own data. So it will depend on how they sell it, right? They're going to sell the oil, but with sovereignty, you know, exactly. That's what they're going to tell us. In the end, it's still just a product, right? And a product that you want to
be efficient
and that it generates resources for the country. That's perfect. We
would generate much more resources. I do go to the extreme. Privatize all aspects of the energy sector. Keep it for a group of politicians who are stealing it, looting it, because they know that anyway, even if there are losses. The Ministry of Finance will increase taxes and continue embezzling funds. You're seeing it with the bids, you're seeing it with the contracts, you're seeing it with the union, and this isn't new. I mean, the open robbery that plagues Pemex has been going on forever. And it's just a matter of looking at the unexplainable wealth of the Pemex union leaders, both during Romero de Cham's time and the current union leader. Come on, it's absurd the way they present it to you, the way they brag about it. And another thing, and the reality is that Pemex has been a total failure in recent years. I mean,
it's like with all the support Pemex has had from the previous government, by now Pepe should be generating a lot. It's the oil company of
the world with the most debt. Yes.
I mean, the least efficient. No, you say, despite all the support and investment Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador made on the issue, it was supposed to be among the best of the best. And unfortunately, well, it's not. It's not
like that. When you have the politician in the middle of that decision-making, what you do is open yourself up to corruption. The clearest case for me is Dos Bocas. Dos Bocas tripled its cost. I mean, Dos Bocas is a refinery that was supposed to cost $8 billion. It was supposed to be ready in 2 years, and now it's been 5 or 6 years, and it's still not ready. Despite the project being declared finished and inaugurated 3 times, it remains incomplete.
It hasn't produced
absolutely anything. And the cost was $22 billion. I mean, there's no absolute logic, but we must remember. And I'm going to bring up another topic we've talked about a lot here, the contracts that Bermudez' companies had. The Secretary of State of Tabasco, who is the leader of a drug cartel wanted by Interpol, was one of the many beneficiaries of the direct contracts in Dos Bocas. Well, that perfectly explains why Pemex doesn't work. If you're giving the contracts to a drug trafficker to carry out the work, then the price shoots up 300, 400, 500% more expensive. Projects often remain incomplete depending on the circumstances. I mean, that's how big the corruption is that goes along with these kinds of processes. That's why many of us prefer for private enterprise to be opened up and for the capital at risk, to be that of private individuals, not taxpayers' money. Because right now, the issue with Pemex is unpayable. These 20 billion will be allocated to paying suppliers. Just to be clear, we're talking about 20 billion for investment. We're not talking about development or maintenance. It's not about what hasn't been paid to suppliers. This information only covers previous years, I believe. That issue won't even be enough for you.
That issue, let's make a quick parenthesis, just because we need to also learn to identify good debt and bad debt, right? Of course, debt isn't bad exactly. I mean, debt itself isn't bad. If your debt is for investment, because that investment is going to generate more money for you, and so on and so on, this will enable you to pay off the debt, have extra money, and generate substantial resources for you. That's good debt, but what most countries do is bad debt, right? Which is just to get by. Right now, they just go into more and more debt, and well, that's how it is. What I'm going to put in
very simple words and on an individual level, it's not the same to go into debt with the bank to open a business that might take off in 3 years. You'll be able to pay off the loan, and from then on, it will give you income compared to taking out a loan to go on a trip or a vacation that you think you deserve. I mean, it's very different depending on the kind of debt you're taking on, and what Mexico is doing is taking on debt just to go on vacation. Yes.
Exactly. So, well, I find what you're saying about it very interesting. Another topic that I also find super interesting is about Pablo Gomez, who is going to lead the electoral reform. And supposedly it's going to include citizen consultations. So it should also include consultations with the opposition. I mean, because in the end, it's a reform that affects everyone, and that opposition that maybe they don't have, don't want, or don't like. But in the end, they're also part of the Mexican population who have voted for them. So
46% of the population voted for the opposition. Of the voters, 46% voted for an opposition. 54% voted for Morena, Partido del Trabajo and Verde. We are
talking about big, right? Big, right? So is it almost half of the population is being ignored due to the citizenship taken into account policy, which is a trap? I mean, you really have to take into account the opposition, who are the representatives of those citizens who didn't vote for them. So, because if you don't make a reform to suit yourself, well, a reform to suit yourself of the current government, right? But, well, you have to think about everyone. If you're going to make a reform that affects democracy so directly, right?
I want to go back a little bit. The political electoral reforms, especially in Mexico, from the 90s to the present, every electoral process has been followed by a reform, except in 2018. In these reforms, the initiatives have consistently originated from the opposition despite being minority groups. Why? Because after an electoral process, the one who loses usually feels wronged. Or, I mean, a specific case. Let's mention the one from 2006. Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador loses the election, and he, along with his deputies, promotes an electoral reform. Because he says, hey, it's unfair for businessmen to give their opinion about public figures and spend money to buy ads saying that a certain person is bad. What happened to him at that moment? That was legal, no matter how much he threw himself on the floor and said, no, but this is, no, you can't say it's unethical, you can say it's immoral, you can say whatever you want, but it was legal, it was okay, and that's what happened. Back then, it was the Party of the Democratic Revolution. Morena didn't exist yet. They requested this electoral reform, which limits ads, business participation, airtime, and more. And it's correct that it was the opposition, because indeed they were the ones who felt wronged back then in a political consensus. All the political reforms have been happening since the 90s, and always, well, at least in a democratic country, the intention of an electoral reform is to have a more level playing field between those who have power and those who want to gain power. That even if all the reforms have been happening, in this case, they haven't. This would be the first reform in recent times in Mexico that comes from the government, that comes from those in power. The worst part is that we already know how the reforms made by Morena have worked. These are reforms where not a single comma has been changed from what the executive sends. These are reforms where they have faked discussions, where they have faked an open parliament. We saw it now with the forced disappearance reform, where they gathered some groups, the groups that were most aligned, and they were like groups dedicated to searching for the disappeared. They specifically saw which parts they needed in the legislation, and when you look at the final legislative work, well, that's it. They listened to them, patted their backs, and dismissed them as their input was disregarded. Yes, they didn't consider them, which is very upsetting. Something similar will likely occur here. They will probably listen to a select few people of their choosing. Your participation was very nice, a pat on the back, but I'm going to put forward the reform I already have ready. Something that really catches my attention and that I shouldn't overlook. It's the people who are part of this committee, a committee that shouldn't even exist. That's also a reality. The president can send her reform to the legislature without issue. Why is this committee being created? I'm seeing it exactly as a media issue, a propaganda thing to say, oh, look, yes, we're democratic. And we held some discussions. It wasn't the president, it was a plural committee. Pablo Gomez, who is the one leading this committee or this commission, a lifelong leftist who has been a deputy 6 or 7 times, was one of the first proportional representatives with the reforms of the 70s from the Communist Party. And he just announced that they're going to use their steamroller without any problem. He's a person who just left the Unidad de Inteligencia Financiera, who didn't have the technical preparation to be in the Unidad de Inteligencia Financiera, and who used the Unidad de Inteligencia Financiera as a political tool for persecution
of the doctors.
I mean, he's a completely dogmatized person, someone who pays more attention to ideologies than to anything else. He will lead their work, but it's not just him. There are also people like Pepe Merino involved. Pepe Merino, he's the director of the digital agency, which is this agency that's now going to concentrate all the information, all the biometrics. He's from the famous spy law, and he's a person who was involved in various scandals, especially during the COVID era in Mexico City. But it was also espionage. And is he the one who did or is credited with making this reform to the spy law? We have to remember that it wasn't just the telecommunications law, because what the government does right now is say, no, yes, we modified the telecommunications law and removed those articles that could be misinterpreted. What they don't tell you is that they put it into 6 different pieces of legislation. The articles that make it easier for this person to have access to all digital information that exists, both private and public. I mean, now with this reform, they'll be able to, for example, if Telcel has any data, they will pass it on to the government. And it's going to be a concentration of all this information, which, by the way, if in the best case scenario, and let's suppose that the government never uses it for bad purposes. Every day there are news stories about how government systems and databases get hacked. I mean, I don't trust at all having all my information in a single portal on a single platform managed by a government that gets hacked one day, yes, and the next day too. Remember the Sedena case, which should be the most protected.
I mean, the leaks that have reached even the level of soldiers of the military. I find it very interesting what the reform intends then, which is to understand this a little better. I mean, what is the intention from your point of view?
There are 3 points that are already being seen. They did it with Plan A, they did it with Plan C, now they're doing it with this new project. And watch out, it's also very specific. The reform is still not known, it's still There is still no public information about what the reform will be, but they're already announcing several things to you. One of them is the plurinominals, which could be the elimination of the plurinominal deputies, because plurinominals are important. The plurinominals, precisely, they give representation to this sector of the population that is voting for an opposition that provides a counterbalance in the legislature, but doesn't win the election. And let's suppose it this way. Mexico has 300 electoral districts. If in all 300 districts, one party wins 51 to 49, one party would have 300 deputies and the other would have 0. The proportion of voters is 51 to 49, but the representation in Congress without proportional representation would be 51. Sorry, it would be 300 to 0. Okay.
Let's say this helps you have more representation of the voters, basically. Totally.
They are called proportional representation. That's the name for the plurinominal seats. That's on one hand. Another thing that's being discussed is party financing, which is very interesting. Why? Because it's something everyone wants. It's very expensive for democracy. The spending on political parties is extremely costly. But right now, when you have a situation with an almost hegemonic party and a totally weakened opposition, it's a finishing blow to the opposition parties. So should the issue of how you're going to finance political parties be reconsidered? And there are many ways you can do it.
For example, private funding. That's why also well, apparent separation of the Green Party from Morena. I mean, like, and the Partido del Trabajo too, huh? And the Partido del Trabajo too, right? So they don't agree with Ojo?
It's very surreal, Mexico. The hope we have as citizens that this reform will be stopped or toned down doesn't come from the opposition, the citizens, or the media. It's the Partido del Trabajo and the Green Party. Damn, we're this screwed, aren't we? Before I delve into this point, I find the current developments with the Green Party and Labor Party quite intriguing. Yeah, two key points that seem like they're going to be part of this reform. And I insist, I say seem because that's how it's been announced and that's how it's been handled in the other reform projects of López Obrador. Because of the type of people who are involved in this cabinet or in this committee. However, the specifics of the reform remain unknown as it hasn't been made public yet, so the outcome is still uncertain. Another key point is the disappearance of the National Electoral Institute as an autonomous organization and its transfer to the Ministry of the Interior, like it was in the 80s. And this is extremely dangerous. I mean, it's not going to have any legitimacy. The elections, if they're once again controlled by the government, they're not going to have legitimacy. I mean, of course, their voters will be happy, so everything will be perfect. Look, we've already seen what happened in Venezuela, damn it. I mean, with the National Electoral Council, that's what they want to do with the National Electoral Institute. And the other is the reduction of electoral councillors and and that they are elected by popular vote. In other words, the same as judges and magistrates, to apply it to electoral councillors, that they become politicized, that they become echo chambers, where the party in power that has the ability to mobilize gives you the cue and tells you who to vote for. Just imagine. I mean, it's the electoral referee, a referee that already has little legitimacy. With the issue of Guadalupe Tadel, who just had her son appointed as the private secretary to the governor of Sonora. That's how big it is, you say. I mean, where are we heading? It's getting more and more dangerous. And look, there's absolutely nothing we can do anymore. That's why now we depend on parties that personally represent the worst, not just today, but always, which are the Green Party and the Labor Party, who have been leeches of the Partido Acción Nacional, the Partido Revolucionario Institucional, the Party of the Democratic Revolution, of whoever lets them. Simply, and I was just joking about that recently, right? The Green Party has not won a federal election in the United States. Either it allies with the Partido Revolucionario Institucional when the Partido Revolucionario Institucional wins, it allies with the Partido Acción Nacional when the Partido Acción Nacional wins, and it allies with Morena when Morena wins. But the Green Party has never lost. The party's vote share never exceeds 4 or 5%, except in 2009 when it reached a maximum of 9%. Now, these two parties that are partners of the government that go in alliance with the government, well, they see their existence in danger. With this reform, it's these parties who could stop this reform. So the big challenge for Morena, for the president, and for her operators is to overcome or reach an agreement with the allied parties. I'm confident they'll achieve it. Why? Because they've shown us they can. How do they act? Using a carrot and stick approach. I mean, we saw live how a senator was extorted and how such a significant reform as the judicial one was approved under the extortion and kidnapping of another senator. We have to remember that everyone talks about UNES, but we should also remember the Movimiento Ciudadano senator who was detained in Campeche, whose father was arrested hours before, and who was held at the Campeche prosecutor's office. On the day of the session, and we forget. So given that background, it seems obvious to me that if they manage to do it with the opposition, then it will be much easier to do it with their allies. And unlike other times, they have the whole country to negotiate with. I mean, they can offer you the judicial branch, they can offer you the legislative branch, they'll be able to offer you the National Electoral Institute, they'll be able to offer you whatever they want, because it no longer exists. Mechanisms of resistance to whatever the executive branch and the hegemonic power of a party feel like doing. I mean, that's how serious the situation is. That's why I see it as very unlikely that the reform can actually be stopped. While it's true, it can be nuanced, and that would be thanks to the Partido del Trabajo and thanks to the Green Party.
Well, there's Hires. I mean, we're facing a very interesting challenge where we would need a strong, intelligent opposition and so on, but there isn't one. It doesn't exist. It's like if
that besides the opposition we have in Mexico, just to be clear, the fact that I'm describing what I see right now, this is not a defense of the opposition, as they are just as bad or even worse. Our opposition is really messed up. We've been following up here every Friday on Adán Augusto's case. This Wednesday was the session of the Permanent Commission of Congress, where finally, a month later, they finally dared to talk about the case of Adán Augusto. And look, it was a very entertaining circus. Of course, it left some impressive TikToks that surely went viral. But the opposition, please, was ridiculous and timid. And everyone, I mean, or the vast majority. There are people, like in everything, just like in Morena, there are people who are decent. Not all of them are a bunch of corrupts. But in the opposition, damn, it's just embarrassing. Did you really see Ricardo Anaya with this excellent oratory and argumentative ability that he has? Well, yes, but a month later, what's the point? I mean, this should have happened a month ago. Shouldn't you have given the government a chance to agree on what defense they were going to read? Because that's how Adán Augusto does it in the chamber, pretending there's a controversy. Do you see Alito Moreno, the president of the Partido Revolucionario Institucional now, with a firm speech like you rarely see from him at the podium? I mean, in general, not him specifically. It's clear now that he's being politically persecuted, now that he's being threatened with losing his immunity. Well, now he's really going all in. Brother, that was a month ago, right? Now? Then you see Movimiento Ciudadano with a totally timid stance, avoiding the topic of Anagustia. No, it's not that we shouldn't personalize the topic of the no. Let's see. The former Secretary of the Interior, who was also a former governor, president of the Jucopo in the Senate, and senator coordinator. From Morena, appointed the leader and founder of a drug trafficking group as Secretary of Security. That's the issue. It's not about not personalizing, it's about personalizing, because you can't normalize that kind of thing.
you know, and Adán Augusto said something like, it's not that I appointed him, I just ratified him. That's the same as appointing him. Exactly. It's appointing him. I mean, because you're ratifying him, because you considered he was the best person to be there, right?
He's trying to downplay their relationship, saying he barely knew him, but now the truth is being revealed. That's being leaked by the federal government itself. About how close you are, not just now, but your whole life with this person. About how through your brother-in-law, who was governor of Chiapas, he and his family were given a lot of contracts. About how you were supporting him with your notary office. Enough, this can't go on, please. He then says, Wasn't it that Guacamaya League debuted in 2022 when I was no longer there? You were the Secretary of the Interior. I mean, you were the Secretary, you were the person in charge
of internal policy. Assuming that he didn't know anything during the government when he was Secretary of State, he should have known.
Of course, Federico Dorin's intervention really hits the nail on the head, and he seems like one of the exceptions to me, in the sense that for the past month, he really has been speaking out, unlike many others, like Ricardo Anaya or Alito Moreno. And Felix Cordon says, let's see who steps up with the information. So the head of intelligence of the Serena, who gave the report where Adan Augusto knew that Hernan Bermudez was the leader of the Barredora, is the son of the secretary of the Serena.
Let's see, there's no
way that this wouldn't be known at the highest levels. There's no way the Secretary of Defense wouldn't tell the president. Now, what's the issue? And why is Morena going along with this person? It's too big to fail. What do I mean by it's too big to fail? Adan Augusto coordinated Claudia Sheinbaum's campaign. We have to remember that for 2 whole years, the country was covered with billboards. We have to remember that both Adan Augusto and Marcelo Ebrard accused Claudia Sheinbaum of receiving money from illicit sources to pay for this pre-campaign. We have to remember that it was the Secretary of the Interior, the brother of López Obrador, according to López Obrador's own words. Throughout the whole country,
Politician in
throughout the whole country with the governors, he went to Dan Augusto. It's too big to fall. I mean, they're not going to take it away from him that easily. Because we're going back to the topic we started with. Can you imagine Dan Augusto testifying in the United States? Yeah, just imagine, of course, with what they're accusing him of. It's narco-terrorism, is that it? If the United States took Adan Augusto, forget it. If Harfush threatens to take Adan Augusto, well, Adan Augusto will run and jump to the United States. So what do you want to know, right? Is he at that level? That's why the situation in Mexico is so complex. And still, let's see, the issue of tax fuel theft. It's important to recall that Adan Augusto is a key figure in this controversy, which Magenta has been covering since 2021-2022. We must not forget Monday's significant events. It terrifies me to see how easily we've normalized criminal and terrorist acts. I'm going to tell you why I refer to them as terrorists, like the ones we saw on Monday. On Monday, they murdered someone in broad daylight on one of the main boulevards of Tamaulipas. They murdered the delegate of the federal prosecutor's office and threw a grenade at him. Is it crazy? I mean, these are images that we would expect to see in the Middle East, in the most conflict-ridden areas. I mean, in the days of Colombia under Pablo Escobar. Carajo is the prosecutor's delegate, and this happens weeks after the seizure they made of Huachicol. Too much to be a coincidence?
no, a very harsh message.
And I call it terrorism because Article 139 of the Federal Penal Code defines it as such. I lists a series of objects that can be used, including explosives, to intimidate the public, to send a message both to the government and to the public to try to instill fear. Please, if they are using grenades against the delegate of the Attorney General's office, it's to send a message, it's to generate fear both in the government and among the population. And it's because they are trying to get the government to act in a certain way, which perfectly fits the definition of the crime of terrorism.
No more.
Here in Mexico, it seems like we're afraid to talk about reality. Well,
There it is, hires. Those are at least some of the topics we have in mind, but for now, I have to cut it off here. Hires, so we can talk later.
we need to check the Peru-Colombia topic, the
territorial disputes.
that they are having in the Amazonas area. We'll talk about it later because it's a topic that, even though it might not seem major, and hopefully it isn't, it really draws a lot of attention. In this context,
We have to talk about that. We have to talk about it because The topic is still pending the issue of Israel and the possible total takeover of Gaza, which has already started at this point. There's also the topic of
Lebanon, of
Lebanon, Russia, Ukraine, China, and Cambodia are the topics mentioned.
just asked that Donald Trump be
The ninth prize,
the price of the.
pass this.
Let's see. I went
They
the settlement of Cambodia.
exactly. And it would be good to add next Friday the topic of AIs, as some regulations have already started coming in. There are also already some reports on how it has been affecting employment internationally in recent months. In some areas where it wasn't expected, and in other areas, not so much. And well, that part is also very interesting. Let's see if we can talk about it. And of course, obviously, to keep talking about the challenges we have here in Mexico with the issue of security and with the issue of tariffs and all that situation. So great, Chires, as always. It's a pleasure to talk with you and remind the community that Chires already has his own channel. So go check it out because he's doing analysis. He's making reports on his channel. So you can check it out, leave him comments, and subscribe. And well, next Friday we'll be here. Thank you very much.
As always, greetings to the whole community. It's always a pleasure to be here gossiping about politics and playing the pundit.
Great. We
See you soon. It's
Good, of course. We'll talk very soon. And then you let me know when we should drop by to your channel. With pleasure. I'm keeping an eye on that topic you mentioned and the other topic as well. You have a section called Cratology, which is very interesting.
I'll explain it to you quickly. I'm currently uploading short videos to my channel which contain my opinions on interesting news stories about politics. Obviously, I have a section that's more like a podcast, which I'm uploading on Saturdays, called Cratology. A friend appears with me. He's a literature teacher, and we talk about a novel, a short story, or an author. We started really good to bring to this part of power. That's why creatology, creation of power, creatology of knowledge. So from there, we break it down. It's a podcast that's about an hour, a little over an hour, where they talk about the literary side, but I also know him from the more political side, power, what it represents. And I also want to bring out that interview side where you'll be the first one. There, as soon as we can set aside that hour to talk about it, and from what comes to mind, we'll get started. Right now, I'm just playing around with the formats. I'm seeing how the channel develops,
I watched the one you guys made about what's the name of that book by Orwell, and it's really good. It's very interesting, a point of view that I hadn't heard before. So, well, check it out, please. It's really good.
I'm making the announcement today. It will be released tomorrow. A story called The Last Question by Isaac Asimov.
a story.
From the 50s that tells you about artificial intelligence. It's like talking to ChatGPT from the 50s, and it takes us there. It's a story that in the story lasts 3 trillion years and in 20 pages. It's fascinating. I hope you like it, and we'll be waiting for you on the channel. It's great chatting with you, Geeds. Take care. Talk to you later. Thank you, and greetings to everyone.